Hey everybody, Miss Dietrich here. We're going to learn how to compare absolute values. This is lesson 3.6 from the Go Math. Let's take a look at this example first. It says Carmen is taking a one-day scuba diving class. Completion of the class will allow her to explore the ocean at elevations of less than negative 25 feet. Use absolute value to describe the depths to which Carmen will be able to dive after taking the class. So step one, graph an elevation of negative 25 feet on the number line. So let's do that first. So if we find negative 25, this is negative 20 and this is negative 30, then a negative 25 would be right here. So let's just plot that. Maybe I'll use blue to make that stand out a little bit. All right, so that's a negative 25. We'll put it over here. All right, so that's done. List three elevations that would be less than negative 25 feet, and then graph these elevations. So if we think of some things that we could put, when we think about values that are less than that, that would be like a negative 30, that would be a negative 32, so that might be about right here, negative 40. Okay, so all of those are less than negative 25 feet. All right, so that's done. Elevations less than negative 25 feet are found blank compared to negative 25 feet. So are they above or are they below negative 25 feet? Well, it would be below, right? These are all below that number. Because depth represents a distance below sea level, it is never negative. In this situation, the absolute value of a negative 25 feet represents a depth of 25 feet. So if we write each of the elevation as a depth, so that there's a negative there, it's hard to see, but that would be a depth of 30 feet. If we did the depth of this, that would be 35 feet. And again, there's a negative there. So if we were to actually talk about how deep that is, what's the distance below the surface, we would say it's 40 feet. So in other words, the length of this line, which I'll trace in yellow, the length of that line is 40 feet. Absolute value is a distance, right? So I'm just going to put that line over here just so we can look at it. All right, so an elevation of less than the absolute value of negative 25 feet is a depth that would be greater than 25 feet. So Carmen will be able to dive depths greater than 25 feet after taking the class. All right, so a little bit confusing. Let's look at a different example. Cole has an online account for buying video games. His account balance has always been greater than a negative $16. Use absolute value to describe Cole's account balance as a debt. It says graph an account balance of a negative 16 on the number line. So if we graph that, let's just kind of move that over, make a little dot, and put the negative 16 there. All right, so next, list three account balances that would be greater than a negative 16. Now remember, greater means that it's to the right. So we would be graphing numbers like maybe that, and let's write those numbers down. So that would be numbers like a negative 12, a negative 8. So anything that's to the right would be okay. So the answers that I have here are negative 12, a negative 8, and a 0. But if you had things like 4 and 12 and things like that, that would be okay too. Look at the next part. It says balances greater than a negative $16 are found to the, and we have to list a direction. Is it to the right or is it to the left? Well, let's look. Aren't these to the right of negative 16? So if we express an account balance of negative 16 as a debt, in this situation, the absolute value of a negative 16 represents a debt of $16. So if we complete this table and we talk about all of these as debt, this would be $15. Negative 14 would be $14 debt. And when we talk about what would be the number that would go with this on the other side of the table, we would come up with negative 13. So each debt in the table is less than $16. So Cole's account balance is always greater than a negative 16, so his debt on the account is always less than $16. All right, so we're going to look at one more example. Let's look at this one. It says, on Monday, Allie's bank account balance was negative $24. On Tuesday, her account balance was less than it was on Monday. Use absolute value to describe Allie's account balance on Tuesday as a debt. Now, anytime you see one of these types of problems, I'm always going to recommend that you make a quick number line. So if we just make a quick number line, doesn't have to be anything fancy, just put it above the word problem. And the number they're talking about here is a negative $24. So let's just plot that on the number line. Now, if it says on Monday, Allie's bank account balance was negative 24, and on Tuesday, her account balance was less than it was on Monday, when we think about which way would we go to get a number that's less, so over here, we might go over here. That's a lesser value. Remember, going to the left on a number line is a number that's less. So like negative 25, possibly, is a hypothetical number. All right, so now use absolute value to describe Allie's balance on Tuesday as a debt. So in this situation, the absolute value of a negative 4 represents a debt of $24. On Tuesday, Allie had a debt of, and we have to decide, is that going to be more debt or less debt than what she had on Monday, which was $24. And hopefully we would come up with more. This is more debt. She owes more money. All right, let's take a look at number 2. Matthew scored negative 36 points in his turn at a video game. In Genevieve's turn, she scored fewer points than Matthew. Use absolute value to describe Genevieve's score as a loss. All right, same thing. Anytime you see a word problem like this, step 1 is to just create some sort of a number line for yourself and graph the number they're talking about. So Matthew's score was a negative 36. Then it says in Genevieve's turn, she scored fewer points than Matthew. Now remember, fewer means less points. Fewer means less points. So that means we have to go to the left on the number line. So maybe over here, maybe it was something like a negative 37 for Genevieve. I'll put a G above that so we know. And let's put an M above this so we know that that's Matthew. Use absolute value to describe Genevieve's score as a loss. So we have to decide Genevieve lost blank points, or lost, more or less than 36 points. So look at the number line and decide. And we come up with she lost more points than 36 because we're talking about a loss here, right? She lost more points. All right, so I think that's a pretty good start to getting used to how to handle these questions on lesson 3.6. Always graph the situation and always stop and think about what they're asking and be very careful with the wording because they're talking about debt here, they're talking about lost. So hopefully you did find this video helpful for lesson 3.6.